Trump spent years demanding that Europe spend more on defense. He wanted European countries to stop depending so heavily on American troops, American weapons, and American money. For most of that time, it sounded like something European leaders would nod along to in public and quietly ignore in practice. Then, in July, something happened that would have been difficult to imagine just a few years earlier. A British general took command of a multinational force preparing to deploy to Ukraine after a ceasefire. More than 25 nations were involved, and European troops were preparing to rehearse it. At the same time, European countries launched new missile defense and long-range strike initiatives, backed by tens of billions of dollars in timelines measured in months, not decades. Trump wanted Europe to become less dependent on America. He may be about to get exactly what he asked for. But for 80 years, Europe never had to. Since World War II, European security has rested heavily on American military power through NATO. NATO was built around a simple promise: attack one member and you face them all. But behind that promise stood something Europe couldn't easily replace: American power, nuclear weapons, intelligence, airlift, and American troops stationed across the continent. Europe had armies. America provided much of the muscle behind the alliance.
Second, going over to the military level, command and control is certainly an integrating capability that the United States provides, particularly at those higher levels. We could get to a place where European allies could do that, but for now, you really do need that integrating capability that NATO's tactical commands of air command, land command, and maritime command provide for all allies.
And because America was there, Europe could afford to spend less. Defense budgets shrank. Militaries shrank with them. Then came Donald Trump. Then the argument became reality. Trump's argument was consistent for years. Europe should spend more. Europe should provide more troops. Europe should carry more of the burden.
A good military, because they've relied on us too long. I told them you can't do that, NATO. But their military said, we will send you things, but you got to pay for them. They said, okay. Now, Biden could have said the same thing.
Then the argument became reality. Washington began quietly reducing forces in parts of Eastern Europe. In Estonia, a rotational American presence of roughly 500 to 700 troops fell to fewer than 100. Washington's attention was increasingly shifting toward China and the Pacific. European capitals noticed.
The Baltics will receive an additional 12 billion euro through SAFE. We have already signed Lithuania's SAFE plan, and we are ready to sign with Estonia and Latvia anytime. We are investing right now in anti-drone capabilities, advanced air defense, and the protection of critical infrastructure.
For years, Europe wondered what would happen if America eventually pulled back. Then it stopped wondering and started preparing. So Europe built something nobody expected. That preparation was already taking shape. More than 25 nations were involved in planning a multinational force for Ukraine. And this wasn't another European declaration. This force was being prepared for deployment: ground, air, sea. Prepared to deploy within days following a credible ceasefire.
And I just want to say that throughout my first term and over the past 18 months, the United States has led a historic effort to dramatically increase the defense spending. As all of the leaders understand very well, the United States remains by far the largest contributor to NATO, monetarily and maybe otherwise, and the strongest military.
On July 24th, a British Lieutenant General, Tom Bateman, took command from his French predecessor at an operational headquarters in Paris. Exercises are being prepared in the coming months.
Yes, it is, and I think we should stop calling these people pro-Russian separatists. It's pretty clear, looking at the equipment, the uniforms, their military tactics, that these are really Russian forces. And if there's any doubt, there is now YouTube footage that's been unearthed from last year from a Russian television program that shows exactly these kinds of special forces being prepared for action overseas.
Europe wasn't just talking about taking more responsibility anymore. It was building the machinery to do it. Then came the part that wasn't just talk. Then came the money. On July 8th, 12 allies committed more than $50 billion over 10 years to long-range precision weapons. Europe hadn't built this from scratch. Britain and Germany were already developing long-range weapons capable of reaching beyond 2,000 kilometers. Britain, France, and Italy were working on a successor to the Storm Shadow cruise missile. Now those separate efforts were being pulled into something much larger. Their joint declaration explicitly referenced recent U.S. force adjustments as a driver behind the initiative.
There is so much that we don't know about this agreement. What we don't know also is whether the memorandum includes the prospect of negotiations on ballistic missiles.
America was reducing part of its footprint. Europe was spending $50 billion preparing for the gap it could leave behind. Then 5 days later came another development. 5 days later, Europe went further still. 10 European nations went further.
They announced the Integrated Anti-Ballistic Missile Coalition, designed to build a shared European missile defense architecture.
At the center of the plan is a Ukrainian interceptor called Freya, designed using lessons learned from years of fighting Russian missiles. Europe wasn't simply building another missile shield. It was trying to turn Ukraine's battlefield experience into continental defense.
We will provide Ukraine with a loan of 90 billion euros for the years 26 and 27. We all want peace for Ukraine, and for that, Ukraine must be in a position of strength.
Ground forces, long-range strike, missile defense, weapons production. Europe wasn't building one program. It was building pieces of something much larger. And it keeps growing. The coalition of the willing itself has expanded well beyond its original European core. What began as a mainly European coalition had expanded to 37 countries, and 26 of them had pledged troops, ships, or aircraft to a future reassurance force for Ukraine. This was no longer a small European experiment. Then the money started connecting Europe. The UK reached an agreement in July giving British defense companies access to procurement contracts under the EU's €90 billion Ukraine support loan. €60 billion, of which is earmarked specifically for defense. Since Brexit, British companies had largely been shut out of EU-funded Ukraine contracts. Now that barrier was coming down. British defense companies were gaining access to tens of billions of euros in European defense procurement. Separately, Ukraine and the EU have built a defense industrial partnership aimed at expanding joint production. Drones, anti-drone systems, and eventually the anti-ballistic missile components the new coalition will need.
The loan was agreed by 27 heads of state and government in the European Council. They have given their word. This word cannot be broken. So we will deliver on the loan, one way or the other. Let me be very clear, we have different options and we will use them.
Europe wasn't simply buying more weapons. It was beginning to build something far harder to reverse: the industrial system to make them itself. But here's what Europe isn't doing. Europe is not replacing America, and it couldn't do so tomorrow even if it wanted to. The Coalition of the Willing's own July statement explicitly welcomed Trump's support for security guarantees and called for active U.S. participation in the process.
He called on Europeans to integrate Ukraine into European structures, whether that's defense production, some sort of a relationship with both the European Union and NATO that includes Ukraine.
This isn't NATO without America, and that's not what Europe is building. But for perhaps the first time in generations, European governments are seriously building the capabilities they would need if America became less available. So did Trump get what he wanted? Trump wanted Europe to spend more. It's spending more. Trump wanted Europe to carry more of the military burden. It's beginning to. Trump wanted America to be less responsible for European security. Washington is reducing parts of its footprint.
Autonomie stratégique et que nous avons eu raison depuis 8 ans de commencer à faire changer l'Europe.
And that's the paradox. The more successful Trump is at making Europe less dependent on America, the less dependent on America Europe becomes. So is this a European army? No. Europe still doesn't have one army, one commander, or one defense policy. What's happening is more complicated and potentially more powerful. Europe isn't building one giant army. It's building different coalitions for different threats. Ukraine. Missiles, air defense, weapons production. Countries that are willing to move don't have to wait for everyone else.
To you all for being here, for attending what is the first Defence Ministers meeting of the Coalition of the Willing for Ukraine. And I want to thank the 200 military planners from 30 countries in Europe and beyond who've been hard at work in recent weeks. Together, we're stepping up as one.
And Britain still calls the U.S. alliance indispensable. But independence comes with a price, and this creates a strange outcome. Trump gets what he wanted. Europe carries more of the burden. Europe gets something it wanted, greater control over its own security. But Washington could eventually give up something in return. Influence. Because the less Europe needs America to defend it, the harder it becomes for Washington to decide what Europe does. And that's the part Trump may not be able to reverse. For decades, Europe depended on America because it had little alternative. Trump told Europe that arrangement had to change. So Europe started changing it. In a matter of months, a multinational force with a real commander, a $50 billion long-range weapons initiative, a new missile defense coalition, a growing European defense industry, and dozens of countries preparing to do more. None of it replaces America. All of it reduces how much Europe needs America to say yes first. More weapons, more spending, European commanders, European defense production, new military coalitions. Trump wanted Europe to take responsibility for its own security. He may get exactly what he asked for. But once Europe learns how to act without Washington, Washington may discover that Europe doesn't always need permission